Hey guys, welcome back to the channel for another episode of The Broken Life. We're back here once again with our 99 Jeep Wrangler 4-liter 5-speed, aka the Jeep. Just joining us now, there's a playlist for this thing I'll link right up there and down in the description for you. And our mission for today is to get the differentials serviced. It's part of our series of replacing and flushing out all the fluids on this thing because it's been quite a while. So the goal is to open that guy's up, drain them out, put new stuff in. We got one in the front, and of course one in the back. And I went ahead and did the wrong thing here and bought, I think $250 of cast iron differential covers. They have like nice drains and stuff in them. The reason that's a bad thing is, one, I'm not exactly flush with money, but you guys are used to hearing that. And two, they won't be here for a few days. And three, these axles look like garbage regardless. Now today is not the day to do a full restoration on these axles as far as appearance. Believe it or not, despite how they look in the video, these are both basically brand new. This one came literally new on a pallet directly from Dana and has only been under this thing for about 4 years, maybe 15,000 miles. But for about 15 years, it hung out in a damp basement, so it looks like garbage. Our guy up front, way on up there, is one my dad and I rebuilt, and we re-geared to match this rear. And when we did that, I stripped that one down, painted it and everything else, but the paint I used is garbage, so it's been coming off and rusting and just makes me mad every time I look at it. So what we are going to do today is get up here around the cover as well as we can, as much as makes sense, and get that stuff cleaned off and get a coat of paint on it while the old covers are still on it. So then later on someday, if I decide to do the rest, I don't have to worry about painting around my nice pretty cast iron covers. We probably will do a video in the future where I show you some of the ways I do stuff like that, but today isn't really the day and we're not going to do a full job. So just know that's what I'll be doing. I'll bring you guys back in when it may be interesting stages. And here we are up front. Between the front and the rear, I probably spent, I don't know, maybe an hour prepping this stuff. And kind of went around the back of the differential housing as well as I could. But, you know, keep in mind, this is just triage. I'm just trying to limit how rusty this general area gets. So in the future, I don't have to work around my nice new covers. We can sandblast this or whatever and maybe stay away from that kind of stuff. I'll show you the back. And here we are out back. Just sort of the same story. Cleaned up what I could, hooked around the front, got what I could. Just trying to limit the amount of work I may have to do later on. And this is what we're going to be using to give it the old job. Everything else I painted with this stuff, I've liked how it's held up. Had someone on the tractor for a couple years now, and it's doing well. The stuff I used to paint the front axle on this thing before obviously did not hold up well. So we'll give this a shot and see how it goes. Not much more to it than you'd think. Shake it up, spray it, walk away for a day. And after some fairly haphazard spray bombing, this is what we ended up with in the rear. I just kind of went all out a little bit. Not the best job in the world, but it's going to be good enough. And pretty much the same story in the front, except I decided to shoot right over a bunch of greasy steering components too, because why not? Also decided to dump a bunch of antifreeze right over like 12-hour-old paint, just because. And that'll work out well with dumping gear oil all over it too, so. Speaking of, it's about that time. If you've never done one of these before, there's some important things to note. First of all, you don't want to just buzz all the bolts out of this thing and just go for broke, because when you do that, this cover is going to jump right off of there and all the oil that's in it is going to go running, and that's bad. So normally what you want to do is leave a couple down here in the bottom that are just barely broken loose, just so the cover can bounce out and we can get the oil to drain. The next thing that might be a little different for a lot of people is most of the time these are siliconed on these days, or just RTV'd on. This guy has a reusable gasket in it because I put one in it. They're called lube locker gaskets, and I think they're about $20 or $30 a piece, so we don't want to screw that up. So we don't want to take the bolts out and start prying on it with anything, although you probably will have to. And the last thing is, if you've never done this before, the odor of gear oil ranks right up there with dog fart, so not pleasant whatsoever. Don't be alarmed by that. This top guy, I'm going to want to leave in loosely too. Like a couple threads out, everybody else is going to come out except that top guy and these two at the bottom. I can already smell it. Alright, so I'm just going to give her a little tappy here and see if we can get it to break off of that gasket without breaking the gasket. We're leaking some out of the holes, which is good. I see the cover moving, so it's probably not going to tear the gasket on the way out. Also good. Back these guys off a little more. I'm also looking at the condition of my oil. I have not serviced this thing since it was rebuilt, so what's in it would be break-in oil still. And so far the color looks pretty decent. There we go. There is a bunch of crap coming out of it, but it looks like we're going to manage to get this done without making a huge mess or destroying our gasket, I hope. We're probably close enough that we can pretty much lose these bolts at the bottom, at least one of them. Yeah, I think we can get rid of her. See if I can show you guys. That right there, you can almost see stripes in it. That's not especially good. I don't think that's water, but it might be a little bit of metal. You can see I can like wipe those away. I'm sure they'll come back. That's not awesome news, but this was all brand new when it went together. Used gears, new bearings. See the oil down the bottom? Oh yeah. When I push it out of there, it's pretty dark. That's not awesome news. That's not the worst thing ever either. So I will continue to get this fished out of there, and then we'll take a look at our pattern, check our backlash, just kind of look at it and see what we think. So I've got the thing cleaned up pretty well. Shot a bunch of brake clean in there, used my fluid gun to suck out the remnants out of the bottom, wiped it out with a rag as well as I could and all that. And the gears themselves look pretty good. And I am not an expert on gears, so I will probably refer you to somebody else to get a proper explanation of what your ride side and coast side and all that should look like on these things and how they should pattern. But I'm not seeing anything that looks really problematic in this thing. But I did find out where our metal came from. Interestingly, it's the same problem I had on the original rear end of this thing that necessitated regearing it and all that stuff to begin with. For some reason, this cross shaft pin is loose in the carrier. And this is actually exactly how my original rear end looked at like 56,000 miles. And it blew apart right about 100,000. And I'll show you, it's sloppy. I think you'll be able to see it's moving back and forth. It's actually squishing oil while it's doing that. It's not supposed to do that. That's supposed to be a pretty nice tight slip fit in there. So this carrier is roached. Funny part about this is I have, for one entire winter, driven this thing down the highway in four-wheel drive at 80 the whole time and had no problems. I'm quite confident when I got the thing, I probably looked at this and saw no problems. And this axle and this carrier, I think has like 180,000 miles on it already. I bought it used and rebuilt it. So who knows what I'm doing, maybe just driving like a jerk or whatever to blow these things out. The fluid in this thing, I think has less than 10,000 miles on it. It's pretty close, but this is the first time I've torn it down since it's been rebuilt. But yeah, that's a problem. The other thing that scared the bejesus out of me so bad I had to go look up a diagram for the thing is I'm used to, looking at rear axles on other stuff, not Jeeps. And usually on a rear axle, on a C-clip axle anyway, there's a bolt in here that holds this cross pin in. So I rotated the thing around and thought, well, maybe that bolt's loose. I'm like, holy crap, there's no bolt there at all. I looked up the exploded diagram for this thing. There's actually a roll pin that's punched down in there that's retaining this pin. So I'm like, man, how am I not dead if that pin isn't being retained? Although it is kind of sloppy at the top too. Just to play it safe, I did take a pick and go down in the hole. And at first I was like, hey, there's nothing in this hole. The pick goes all the way in. But I can feel the edge of the roll pin around there. So it does have a roll pin in it. It's not broken. Just that cross pin is loose. So that carrier's trash and needs replaced. This will get me by for a while. I don't think it's really going to hurt anything. Now that I know it's a problem, I'll put it on my wish list or items of things to do. I'd kind of like to put an air locker in the front of this thing anyway, but that's like $1,000, so maybe we'll do that, maybe we won't. But either way, that's probably where our metal's coming from, is it's coming out of the carrier in that hole. And the side gears themselves don't look real awesome. They don't look terrible, but there's some scoring and wear and stuff in them. And then some of those metal shavings are just going to be from break-in, because this would have been a different setup on these gears because they were all set up wrong when we got them. So I'll probably just try and pay a little more careful attention to the front end of this thing in the future. Keep my eye on that pin and definitely get fluid out of it more often, maybe like every 5,000 miles or something. Anyway, let's get to the rear. So here we are at the rear, and this really is a second verse, same as the first type of deal, at least as regards getting the cover off. So I will bring you guys back when the fluid starts flowing. So if there's a bunch of metal or water that pours out of it, you can laugh at me while that happens. This thing you'll find on most axles is your axle tag. Don't be a jerk and throw this away if you take the cover off. Put this back on for the next guy so they can read what the freaking thing is. This will tell you the gear ratio on most things, and it'll sometimes also tell you if it's got a limited slip or anything in it, which this one does. So this one's going to look different than the front one. And I'm pretty sure I've serviced this one before, but all these bolts have RTV on them. This thing's been in here for quite a while for that to be true. So I'm hoping there's a lube blocker in here. I'm almost certain I've done this one before. Bolts are fairly loose, but not super loose. Same deal. Just going to give her a little tap-a-roo. See if we can get it coming so we don't destroy the gasket that I hope is in here. Yeah, it's moving. Gear oil's starting to come. I see like some foam coming out here. Nothing looks terrible though. I think that might actually just be RTV light coming out of this hole. Yeah, it's kind of a gray color. I'd bring you guys in closer, but I'm afraid of dumping gear oil all over the camera. Oddly, it's just coming out gray out of this hole. And this axle also holds a lot more oil because this axle tube is actually full of oil in the back. And in fact, I think maybe the wheel seal over on the right is starting to leak. Something over there is getting wet. So that's something we'll have to pay attention to in the future. Doesn't surprise me because it's very low miles, but very old. There we go. A little more speed to her. I see we're actually getting some gray stuff out of both corners. So that may actually be some metal. We're just going to let her drain down like that and not make a huge mess, I hope. And there's the gray stuff I'm talking about. You can see like the little kind of river of it running out there. That is probably metal. From what? Don't know yet. Okay. Let's see if we can get the show on the road now. Get at least this bottom bolt out. The top bolt on this thing is kind of hard to reach. So I'm going to put a couple side bolts back in it so it doesn't just fall off when I get it out. So I don't want this to like splash oil in my face or anything. You might like that, but I wouldn't. All right. Let's see if we can get her on out. And yeah, this does have a lube blocker in it, so that was just residual RTV in the holes. And in fact, there's like a bunch coming out of these holes. So I'm hoping that's not actually metal and that's just RTV. And you can see it on the gasket where all that RTV was. The gasket's gray on all the holes, so I think we're okay. I don't think this thing's jacked like the front is. I hope you can see it on camera, but when I fish stuff out like that, you know, there's some metal in here because there always will be. This thing's got clutches in it. It's a limited slip. So there'll be some clutch material and stuff, but you can see this oil looks much better. Or I hope you can anyway. There's no river of goo coming out of it. That's good news. And I think the fluid in this one's maybe 8,000 or 10,000 miles old. Yeah, and as I'm getting to the bottom, I'm getting some clutch material out of it. It's starting to put some black out. Totally to be expected. No big deal. So I'm going to hit this thing with some brake clean, which I did in the front, but I'm going to be careful to try and not spray the carrier. So like I said, there are clutches in here, so they're like brake discs. And we do not want to erode those away prematurely. We want those to hang in for a nice long life. So I'll get this cleaned up and bring you guys back when I'm done. So the story is generally a lot happier here out back. Once again, the pattern on everything looks really good. My side gear pattern looks really good too. What you saw up front, if you were able to discern anything about the pattern for yourself. Again, me not being an expert on this topic, I don't really want to go down that road. But keep in mind on the front, what you saw was like I said, that thing had been re-geared, rebuilt, whatever at some point. So undetermined number of miles. This gear set has like 10 or 15,000 miles on it from new. And it looks pretty awesome. It's patterning pretty much what I would think would be pretty much perfect. It looks really nice. The side gears look really nice. This pin that we have problems with up front is really nice and tight. Backlash feels pretty good. So how much I'm able to move it this way before the pinion turns feels pretty good. And that is the bolt that I thought was missing in the front that had me terrified for a few moments. So overall, rear end's looking really good. One thing that's mildly disturbing is I have almost no resistance on my rear brakes. Like, you should not just be able to spin a drum brake rear end like that The brakes normally have more drag to them than that. So I'm thinking the signs of wetness I see over here may be a wheel cylinder that's leaking, and maybe my adjusters need some attention, you know, a couple things. But nothing's going to delay this wing of the project, and frankly nothing's going to keep me from driving it. Brakes on this thing felt just fine before, so even if we do have a very slight leak, we're going to let it roll for now. This thing's looking good. I already attempted to try and get the lube blocker gasket off the front cover, and it was not wanting to cooperate. And this one isn't much different. I did grease these before I put them on, so I just took some grease to both sides, and they're not really wanting to cooperate anyway, so we're going to have to spend a little bit of time and be cautious getting these things off, because I sure would like to reuse them since they're supposed to be reusable. Both of them are on their first use right now. They both went in at the same time. That is going to be the next bit of our puzzle, is to try and reclaim our gaskets and, you know, wipe off the paint we destroyed with a bunch of brake clean, which, you know, saw coming, but what are you going to do? Let's try and delicately get them off of there. And to do that, I'm just going to take this putty knife, which is none too sharp, but also kind of thick. And I'm just going to see if I can get under the corner, just around the edge maybe, and see if I can just start popping it up. Yeah, it's coming. I just want to be careful here, because a little bit of one of these actually did stay behind on the axle housing. So I know it's possible to separate the orange stuff from the black stuff, and we don't want to do that. That spot's pretty stuck. I think right there I'm pretty squarely under it, so I'm just going to try and twist in a little bit of light pressure and go on around. Seems to mostly want to get hung up around the holes, probably because of the RTV that kind of leaked in there. Okay, she's free. Turn it over and see what we get. I don't think it's too terribly torn up. I'm going to take a rag and just clean it off, and we'll take a better look at it. And I've got them both off and both all cleaned up. This front one here pretty much just jumped right off of there. So I think the RTV around these holes was what was holding it in. That was old cured out RTV, which is weird. I wouldn't have expected it to still be sticky. But they cleaned up pretty nice, and you'll see they've got a nice sheen to them. Because what I did, I just took a paper towel, in fact this one right here, with some fresh gear oil on it, and just went around and cleaned them both up as well as I could. And you can see we got most of that RTV off of this guy. I'll probably go back around the housings and try and clean around those holes pretty good too. But these guys look pretty good. In addition to using the gear oil to clean them, we've now greased them up so they shouldn't stick to the housing and they shouldn't want to stick to the covers when we do need to service the covers again at some point in the future. Speaking of, our completely sensible serviceable covers showed up, which are not at all just because I wanted to put some bling under this thing. That's only about half of it. The real reason I bought these things is, one, the official Dana Spicer OEM branded ones were pretty much the cheapest ones I could find that I felt would be of any quality. They have drain plugs in them. You will see the factory supplied covers have fill holes, but no drain holes. You saw how we had to drain these, and it's a real pain. And I don't like doing it that way, so I don't want to do it that way. And the other thing with that is, since I can drain them easily, I'm much more likely to frequently change the fluid in these things. There's a strong argument to be had that you should always pop your covers so you can inspect for problems like what we did find in the front of this thing. But what more often than not happens is people just straight up never change these anyway. So if I have these drain plugs and I have these fills, and there are two fill plugs, because if your Jeep's lifted, the axles will be at different angles, so you'll have to fill through either the top or the bottom one, I guess. But by having the drains and fills on them, I'm much more likely to service them frequently. And I'm thinking what I'll probably do is change the diffs every other oil change, and then every other time I'll pull them. So basically going 6,000 miles on differential oil, which is kind of an insanely short service interval, but I've had nothing but trouble with the axles on this thing, and frankly every Dana axle I've ever owned has been junk. So I'm just going to do fluids all the time. So at 6,000 we'll drain it, and at 12,000 we'll pull the covers, check them out, put everything back in, blah blah blah, wash, rinse, repeat. We already know we have problems on the front, so I'm going to be back inside the front to do something there much sooner than 6,000 miles, so nothing to worry about. But these guys overall look pretty nice. Little disappointed they're made in India, but they were also, like I said, the cheapest ones of any kind of quality I felt I could buy. You can get like sheet metal ones, but I definitely wanted something stronger than that, and I didn't want aluminum ones because they'll corrode and look crappy, whereas these will just turn to rust and then I can just paint them, I guess. But Dana is nice enough to give you these brand new bolts with these things, which everybody says they're crap, which meaning they break off when properly torqued, so niet, comrade, not on my TJ. So you know we went to the getting spot, McMaster car, and hooked up the stainless steel. So these will be nice and shiny forever, so my whole bling kit here slash serviceability kit. Should be good to go for a good long time, I hope. So the next move here is pretty easy. We get back under the Jeep, get a little brake clean on a rag, clean the faces off, stick our covers and gaskets on, and then there's a torque sequence and spec that we have to use with those replaceable gaskets, or else we can, I guess, deform them or whatever. That's all there really is to it. So I don't really think I need to bring you guys along for all that. I'm just going to get these things thrown on, and then we'll get back to you when it's time to put some fluid in it. Well, and the plot thickens. First of all, I held the old cover up here to mark which one of these is going to be my actual fill. It looks like it's probably going to be this guy. The idea is you just fill it up until oil comes out and it's full, so easy enough. But the big news is, despite me talking a big game about my stainless bolts and the ones coming with it being crap and snapping off apparently, one of my stainless guys snapped off. And what's interesting about that is I didn't even have it turned up to 35 pounds yet. I had kind of started on that way and stuff started feeling weird, so I backed off the torque and I started going around at 20. I started at 15 on all of them. So I ran a full pattern at 15. I'll show you guys all this on the front where it's easier to see. I changed my mind. I'm not just going to do this and then catch back up. We'll show you in the front. So I'd run them all to 15, reset the wrench for 35. The factory manual calls for 30. At 35, I just went around, around, around. Nothing was happening. So I backed it down to 30 and went round, around, around. Same story. Backed it down to 20 and every single one of them was fine. So turned it up to 25 and started going around. This guy came up on torque, started trying his buddy up there, did not come down up on torque, started getting nervous and thought, well, I'll just come down to this guy and just run at him until I can't anymore, because if everything goes wrong, it's an easy one to get to. And sure enough, everything went wrong and the head snapped off, which is better than pulling the threads out of the housing, which I'm hoping didn't happen. But now I get to take this guy back off, take all these bolts out, throw them away, because I don't know how stretched they are. Fortunately, I bought plenty of spares. Get everything lined up again, start over, and start trying to torque it again. Lots and lots of fun. Fortunately, it broke off and left me a little nub right there, so I'm just going to try and get a pair of vice grips on it and see if I can spin her out of there, if we're lucky. Yeah, it's looking like she's going to come right out. She was coming right out of there without any trouble, but now she's giving me trouble, of course. She's on the way, but man, she does not feel happy. I'm really hoping we didn't screw up this axle housing, because it would not make my day to have to repair the threads in this thing. But she's going to come out at least. I'll inspect for damage. Well, this is our questionable hole. That's what she said. And there doesn't appear to be any damage. Just ran another bolt in it just fine. It's okay. But what I am noticing is that the bolts are way too long. So that's the problem. That's why they broke off, is because I bottomed them out. Or if that one hadn't broke off, I probably would have bottomed them out. Here's one of the factory bolts, and it actually bottoms all the way in the thread. This guy next door is one of my stainless guys, and he's got enough gap in him that I'm worried about it. And I think they have more gap in them than the difference in the thickness in the cover. So I think these bolts are just straight up too long, which sucks because they were like 50 bucks. Truth is, I don't think these bolts need to be longer than stock anyway. And it's annoying that buying a stock replacement cover from, or at least the original equipment manufacturer, that they don't know this. Some more fun things. Here's another bolt that was just about to let go. You should be able to see how it has stretched those threads compared to a guy that more or less looks okay, but both of these are headed for the trash because they were over torqued badly. And just for fun, here's one of the bolts that came in the kit, and keep in mind this is the kit from the manufacturer of this axle. And there's the aftermarket bolt I bought. You can see they are both the same size. Same size, same length. So what they supplied and what I bought both bottom out in those holes before they'll take thread. And that's why you saw it twisting the head off up here where there's no thread, where it was just in the hole in the cover where there's no threads. So the bolts they provide are in fact too long, which means the bolts I bought are also too long. So what I did is I bought more stainless bolts in the length of the OEM bolts. I just bit the bullet and bought more bolts. It'll probably be like 30 bucks and we'll just throw them in our inventory, these old guys. You know I like my stainless stuff, so no big deal. One thing that does sort of suck is this is the shortest one I can get without serrations in the head. You see the back side of it there is just a smooth head. The stock ones are serrated. I think you can just barely make out, and the ones I bought had to be serrated. I intentionally didn't want serrated ones because I didn't want that serration to tear up the finish on these things, but these aren't powder coated or anything. These are just cheap wrinkle paint, so no great loss if it does. I thought they would be nicer finished than they are, but they were also the cheapest ones I could find, so is what it is. Other fun facts, I looked up torque specs for just 5/16 18 thread bolts. Grade 8, the recommended torque is 20 foot-pounds. The torque specified by the maker of the gaskets, by the maker of the axle housing, is 30. or actually the gaskets are 35. Jeep service manual's 30. For 18/8 stainless like this, recommended is 11 foot-pounds. And we ran these up to 20 with no problem, and it was when I started going for 25 that I started pulling stuff. So what I'm going to do is probably, when I get the new ones, install them at 20 foot-pounds and see if the covers leak. If the covers leak, then we'll worry about it then. I'll hang on to my stock bolts, which there's nothing wrong with, they're just not stainless, and I spent my money on bling, so why not? If there's a problem, I'll switch back to the stock ones that are just steel, and we'll torque them on down. You know, I guess it's possible that the factory ones are some grade better than grade 8, you know, grade 37 or some standard Dana invented just for this job, but seems unlikely. So when we get our new guys, we'll just torque them to 20. In the meantime, because I don't want this cloud hanging over my head until the new ones show up, I'm going to install the covers just basically finger tight with the bolts they came with, or the old ones, some dealer's choice, just so everything's all up there. So when the new ones come, I can just trade the bolts out, torque them up, and I'm done, except for filling the fluid. So that is what I'm going to go do on the rear. I will bring you guys along to the front and show you the process I used to install it up to this point. I also wanted to take just a quick minute to say that this kind of stuff where, you know, you run into weird bolts and stuff like that, even if you're buying factory replacement parts, is just hot rodding. That's really what it is. This is just how hot rodding goes. I know we're not doing anything that exciting here. We're not building a race car. We're not building this thing to go rock crawling. But when you put parts on like this, you are hot rodding. And this is just part of how the game is. Be prepared if you get into something like this that things are probably not going to go your way, or they may not go your way. Adapt, overcome, keep trucking. That's all you can do. So here we are up front. First thing I'm going to do is take a shop towel, a little bit of brake clean, and just clean off this flange where everything seals up. Next, we're going to do the same thing with the flange on the cover. And that little bit of rust is going to bug me, so I'm going to clean that off quick. Probably this guy down here. And what I've got here is just a small piece of 120 grit sandpaper, because that's what I have. I would prefer like probably 400 grit or something for this. But I'm going to take some gear oil, because it's what I have sitting next to me, and oil this down. So that is all coated in oil now. And the whole purpose of doing that is to hope that the oil hangs on to the sand and we don't just fill our differential with sand, because that wouldn't be good at all. Although this is the junk one, so. And you can see all the rust and everything I'm sanding off is kind of staying in solution there because of the oil. And maybe some problem children up there. May as well get them all in here. I can't even catch my nail in that, so I'm not going to worry about it anymore. Ignorance marks from somebody right there. But the thing didn't leak before, so call that good enough. I'm going to hit it with brake clean again. And the whole idea of everything we're doing here is just so that gasket has somewhere clean to set up against. So we've got everybody all cleaned up. Next thing I'm going to want to do is take our gasket, which we cleaned up nicely before. And I'm just going to take a generous amount of gear oil and just coat it both sides. And that's just going to help keep it from sticking the next time we want to take this thing apart. So I've got this guy nicely greased up. The next thing to do is make sure we get it put on the right way, which I can see we're on. Most of these only go on one way, so you have to flip them or not. And it looks like we're pretty good there. Before we hoist that cover up there, I'm going to take some more gear oil and just get this whole flange nice and wetted down, because it's not going to hurt anything, and it'll also help that gasket be able to move around, because we'll want it to kind of find its home. The next move is to have a couple of screwdrivers to help you get this thing started, to just kind of help you hold it up there. And we'll get her stuffed on. Stick a screwdriver in there, try and get one in there, and that'll just help keep it centered up. Get a bolt started if we can. That's the thing with these gaskets, is they're steel reinforced, so if they're not lined up just right, your bolts won't want to start. Okay, I've got two in it at this point, so our screwdrivers can live free again. And you don't want to tighten any of them up until you get all of them in. And I can actually just lay eyeballs on that hole and see that we're lined up pretty well in the gasket. You see some of these are kind of fidgety. That's why I wanted to put them all in, and we'll just take them back out once we get the right bolts, because I don't want to screw with this later. I just kind of want the bad part behind me. Finishing touch, we want to make sure our drain plug is actually freaking tight, because that would suck to just be running down the road and all the fluid fall out. These come with red sealer on them, which I'm a little dubious of, but we'll try it and see what happens. And this thread sealer is actually peeling off as I'm doing this. The rear one went in better. I also don't have a torque spec for this, so about like that feels pretty good. This guy we're not going to end up using, so same story. Okay, let's check this guy again, because why not? It's Let's go get our blue guy. And again, I painted that guy blue, so I know which one is our fill plug for this, and I compared it to the factory cover. And it doesn't need to be tight because we just need to take it out to fill it up again. So, till our new bolts come, we're done. So our bolts have arrived, and through extensive laboratory testing, meaning I broke off like 3 of them in this grade 8 5/16 nut right here. This guy finally had the last word and seized up in there. I've determined these guys like to fail around 24 foot-pounds, and around 20 they all seem happy. So I'm going to run them in at 20 foot-pounds along with a little bit of Loctite blue on them just to play it safe. So I don't mind stuff falling off my vehicle, but I do mind if it's a brand new stuff. And spoiler alert, I already did the rear end that way and seems fine. Everything went good. Seat's totally fine. Looks nice too. And the blue fill plug in the rear worked out just fine for us too. Took exactly what it should have. So there's really no rocket science here. Take our old ones out. Just doing them one at a time. A little bit of blue Loctite, I don't know, stick, gum, what is this? Gel. Not really sold on this stuff as far as that delivery format anyway. Put it back in the hole, snug it up. Just like so. So on around we're gonna go a whole bunch more times. We'll catch back up when I get all done with this. So I've got them all changed out and all Loctited. So now the move is to start torquing them. Lube Locker recommends doing these in a pattern, and their pattern can look confusing, but really all it is one, and then one across from it, and then clockwise on around. So 1, 1, 1, 1, all the way around until you're done. They also suggest bringing it up to torque in 2 stages, which won't hurt, so I'm going to do it. So I'm going to go 10 and then 20, just crisscross pattern on around. And so you guys aren't bored to tears, I'll just bring you in for the final 20 foot-pounds check, and I'll run the pattern quick so you can see what I'm talking about. So I ran my pattern twice, once at 10, once at 20. Now I'm just doing a final check. So that feller, and if I screw this up mildly, I apologize, but I think you'll get the idea. There we go, 20 foot-pounds. I also looked up the torque specs for the transfer case plugs. Transfer case has plugs on it just like this housing, and they say 15 to 25, so I'm just going to hit these at 20, just to be sure. And that one I can't reach because of the steering. There's that one. Okay, both those to 20. This guy's our fill, so out he comes. Time to get him filled up. But to do that, we need to lift this thing up until it's level. In the rear, I got lucky because of the sag of the suspension combined with the slope of the garage floor and blah, blah, blah. It came up pretty much dead level. This one, I'm actually going to lift it up until the Jeep itself measures level. And I'll lift it up on the suspension. A little bit of overflow oil from installing our gasket. Want to get that off of there because we'll want to see right away if it's leaking before we start dumping oil in it. Anyway, time to get it leveled off. And to do that, I'm going to use this guy right here, which is just a digital angle meter. So it'll just read out what angle we're on. So right now it's saying it's tilted forward almost 2 degrees. I've got a floor jack dead center under the front axle, so I'm just going to jack it up until that guy reads 0. Fortunately, since it's a Jeep, these fenders are pretty much dead flat. And I've experimented a few other places on this thing that I'm pretty confident are flat, and they pretty much are. They all tend to agree. So up we go on the jack. Oh, it's neat. The backlight apparently lights back up again when it feels like it. And just for my own reference, I'm going to check it against the other fender. The other fender says 0.73 in the opposite direction. So what we probably want to do is try and average them out and say 0.3. Whoa, whoa, whoa. All right. See what the other one says. 0.54, 0.61. And it's probably getting discombobulated because I keep snapping it around and stuff, but I'm going to say that's about as level as I'm likely to get it. Nothing left but to fill it up now. And to do that, we're going to be using this guy, which is actually a power bleeder for bleeding your brakes. So you screw this guy onto your brake master cylinder and pump it up and off you go. You'll have seen me use this in some other videos, but if you're just bumping into this one, this thing works pretty good. I've customized it mildly with a ball valve and a length of hose just so I can turn stuff off. What I will say is for gear oil, and in the rear I put 75-140 in it, which is the heavy duty grade gear oil for the rear. It took 100 years to fill because this stuff's pretty thick. Just kind of is what it is. If you're doing nothing but this kind of oil service every day, I would not recommend one of these to you, but for a guy at home, it works pretty good. I like it better than the syringes, and I certainly like it better than trying to squeeze one of these things at the hole. That's just terrible. Speaking of oil, I almost always run Mobil 1 in stuff I care about, but since we know that front axle is a box of trash, we got the cheap stuff. We're just going to throw some Valvoline 8090 in it. There is no heavy duty option for the front. It is only recommended to run 8090, so that is what we're going to do. 1.3 quarts. I found this guy actually does pump pretty much all that you put in it out. So I'll probably put about 1.5 quarts in it just to play it safe, you know, kind of ballpark it and get it pumped up, and we'll get it filled. It'll take 100 years, but process is pretty straightforward no matter how you want to do it. So I've got my guy filled up and pumped up. Sorry about the lighting, it's dark. Got my hose in there. The only thing to do now, turn our ball valve on and wait. You'll also notice this thing is on a jack. There's still stands under it, and I'm not hanging out under it. I'm way out here. So anyway, let's get it filled up. So the way this works is you let fluid run into it until it starts running out of the hole. And that's really all there is to say about it. So now we wait. That is also why there's a drain bucket under here. Plus I'm not too overly trusting that nothing else will leak. Now I sit on a stool and watch. And this is about as much fun as you'd think, but every now and then you can see an air bubble pass through that thing. That's about the only thing I've got to watch for about the next 5 minutes. So there it looks like we are just starting to get full. So for me, I'm going to turn the ball valve off on my pump, get our hose out, and then it's really going to start pouring. Get our plug in as quick as we can. Come on. There we go. I'm going to see if I can just get it snugged up with the Milwaukee. Yep. Got our torque wrench. And there we go, 20. Sweet. The last move here, of course, is just to clean up our dribblings, because we definitely want to know if it's going to leak. So if we see drops coming out of it tomorrow, we want to know that those are new drops and not filling drops. We won't leave a drain bucket under it intentionally, so we can see if it dumps some out on the cardboard here. In the meantime, I'm probably going to take it off of the stands, because I think we're done with that part of the work here. Not so fast. After getting our pressure pot pumped back out into the containers, what was left, it looks like we only used about 2 ounces out of this second quart. And 1/3 of a quart should be about 12 ounces. So about that much more fluid needs to go in that thing. So the plug I have marked in blue is wrong. So I'm going to just take the top plug out and shoot some in there. Kind of hoping I can shoot it in there with this thing, because I'm using that top plug, because I just drained the pressure pot and it takes 1,000 years. So I'll update you in a second. So we're back. And right there you'll see the bottle says 20. That's because as I was going, this cap popped off on me and I dumped a couple ounces. So we're probably more like in between here somewhere as far as full. I ended up having to fill from the top plug like we discussed, but the top plug seems like it's awfully close to where this thing should be. So I think if I fill it to the top plug in the future, it'll maybe just have, you know, a few ounces more than they say it should or whatever. But this raises the question of why it even has 2 plugs. This thing's stock suspension, everything else. It was for sure level. I dropped the front axle all the way down just to see what would happen with that fill plug still out, and no oil came out of it, so I have no clue. And since I am mentally ill, I did swap the plugs around too, so those will probably both leak now. We'll check up with it in the morning and see how it looks. Well, let's see if there's any giant puddle of oil. Nope, no giant puddle of oil. That's a good start. Don't see any dripplings on the cover either. All good news. So we're going to say the rear is squared away. Everything's looking pretty good up here too. Don't see any dripplings. Just a little bit on my finger there. Probably just residual. Doesn't look like our towel picked up any overnight. We'll keep an eye on these guys and make sure they're all sealed, but have pretty high hopes. So as is often the case, I am reciprocal King Midas. Everything I touch turns to garbage. But at least our diff service, I believe, is done. And we'll get back inside this front one here in a little while when we've got a little more cash freed up and get to fixing on that carrier. I've got a couple of ideas, but they ain't cheap. So anyway, guys, as always, appreciate you stopping in for this one. I'll catch you on the next one. I'm Max, that's Saddington Bear, and we make videos like this all the time. Here are a couple links to some other videos we've made, and we really appreciate you guys stopping in.